Alrighty, moving on. So, as I mentioned, this kind of time period, we are now shifting back to around 100 AD until about 1000 AD, as we take a look at Sanskrit drama in India. Now, this is what is the placement of Shakuntala, which is your next play due on Tuesday. It is one of the longer ones, but it reads very briskly, kind of like almost an extended fairy tale. Okay, so and there's several reasons for that, which we'll cover. As I said, this is a pretty vibrant time for theater in the Far East, contrary to that of what's going on in Europe. We're not really taking a look at Peking opera, which is sort of the culmination and development of the Chinese theater, but that was very much in development and growth and merging into a spectacular performance form, not dissimilar from kabuki. It's highly rigidly structured on painted masks. There's a lot of sort of music support as well as choreography of movement. The content, of course, is quite different, but stylistically there are a lot of similarities. Okay? So taking a look now at Sanskrit, which is ancient India, which is quite different in many respects. So its origins are such that Sanskrit actually specifically refers to a language. It's kind of like, not dissimilar from, say, in Rome, Latin was the language of Rome. But you go anywhere outside of Rome, and people are speaking their own language, they're speaking Greek, they're speaking Egyptian, what have you, they're speaking various dialects. And that's not dissimilar to what's the situation and circumstance in India. Those that were learned, those that were Brahmins with priests and so forth, that had some element of education to them, they're speaking Sanskrit. But their art form largely developed in isolation from anything known in the West. It's very unlikely that there was any kind of crossover. Again, Marco Polo didn't really link the Western and Eastern hemispheres until the 1300s, and all of this is happening before the 1300s. Now, that's not to say that there couldn't have been, a few Roman wanderers who ended up, going all the way through the empire and stumbling into India, coming up with this, hey guys, we got this thing going on, but there's no documentation of that, really. So, the record keeping of this and the records of Sanskrit as a dramatic form are very vague, especially in the early stages. Really, the first evidence is from some informal descriptions around the 1st century BC. Okay? But we're really talking mostly about 180 to about 1000 AD. And again, once again, it all sort of starts out of some sort of homage, ritual, religious ceremony. Now again, we're talking about the notion of Hinduism here. That the Brahman, who is the god that kind of is the overall creator, with lesser gods such as Vishnu and Shiva the destroyer, Vishnu the nurturer, Brahma the creator. Okay, so it's a ceremony, again, dedicated at times of religious significance that is somehow scripted, performed, and usually with some kind of dance to it, including the invocations that were meant to stimulate in some way, shape, or form the spiritual connection between humans and the gods. And oftentimes this took a form of an animal dance. There's as you read through Shakuntala, there's a great deal of interactions with the animal world in many ways, shapes, and forms. And that is very much part of the sort of Hindu notion of one earth. Okay? Frog dance, I just put that as an example because it literally imitated the nature of frog jumping around. So, in addition to that, just like in Greece, where we have these sort of like two staple works of literature, the Odyssey and the Iliad, Sanskrit has two staple works of literature. Now, they don't resemble the Odyssey and the Iliad in any way, shape, or form. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana are probably the two most well-known works of ancient India. And these kind of became the sort of somewhat the inspiration and basis for many of the early Sanskrit performances. Now, around 1000 to 1100 AD, the Muslims invaded India and carrying with them the value system of depicting gods or even depicting other people goes against the nature of the religion when as Muslim and Islam became more significant presence in India, it kind of squelched or did away with the Sanskrit performances. So after that time, it's really an art form that kind of fully disappears until scholars resurrect it, I'd say late in the 19th century. So this dude, Bharata, wow. This one's tricky. Nojatsastra. Thank you. Nojatsastra was a work, just like we have Vitruvius in Rome, we have Aristotle in Greece. Bharata wrote the Nojatsastra, literally the art of theater, to lay out sort of the standards by which Sanskrit theater was to be performed and what its content and presentation would be. And I have to say, it's rather unique because its sort of characteristics are vastly different than pretty much anywhere else in the world that we know of. So he describes what was called a super play, which was kind of like the pinnacle of Sanskrit achievement, which was a 10-act play. Shakuntala is 7, so it's not quite a Mahanakata. So it's what's known as a Nataka. So it's a little bit lesser known. And these ones were usually in celebration or in some way, shape, or form dedicated to one of the Hindu gods. And these ones are typically a little bit more oriented towards everyday life. And they had, elements of comic or erotic outcome along with some kind of danger, but with a hero attached to it. Now, Sanskrit plays come basically anywhere from 1 to 10 acts, for the most part. And there's a uniformity to it, which is kind of interesting, which I'll get to a little bit more in a second. But this is something that Bharata laid out very specifically in his book, as well as some of the performance characteristics. So, each play has to have this sort of characteristic and notion to it. Each play, in order for it to be considered proper and viable, has to have the desire to attain something, has to have the organized efforts to try and attain it, has to demonstrate some possibility of success that leads to certainty that comes to the final outcome of actual attainment. So, in taking a look at this, what would you surmise about the nature of Sanskrit drama?
Not a lot of tragedies?
Nope. Tragedy is not represented here. There is no such thing as tragedy in Sanskrit drama. Its outcome was ordained and specifically intended to be pleasant and rewarding. Okay? And that partially goes into the nature of the performances as well. Tragedy was not permitted. The depiction of death was not permitted. So, the content is pretty much happy endings. And endings that may face some danger, but ultimately you know it's going to be a good outcome. Now, one of the content characteristics, and this is hard to really decipher in a translated script from an ancient language, but that the characters of some higher station spoke in proper Sanskrit. Characters that were of a lower station, as well as women, spoke in Prakrit, which was essentially conversational prose. Okay? So that the Sanskrit characters are speaking in elevated verse, and the conversational elements are